Myself Dr. Hema. In this video I'll be speaking about gingiva. I'll be presenting this topic under three sections. First, introduction. I'll speak about oral mucosa, periodontium, and then how various authors have defined gingiva. Under development, I'll speak about when, where, and how exactly the gingiva is formed. Under macroanatomy, I'll discuss about the anatomic features as well as the applied aspects of the marginal, attached, and interdental gingiva along with gingival sulcus and GCF. Now, oral mucosa. Oral mucosa is the lining of the oral cavity. Orban and Sicker in 1945 and 1946 have classified oral mucosa into three types based on their function. First is masticatory mucosa, and then next is specialized mucosa, and then there is lining mucosa. Masticatory mucosa includes the gingiva and the hard palate. The specialized mucosa includes the dorsum of the tongue. And then lining mucosa is the mucosa that is going to cover the rest of the oral cavity, that is buccal mucosa, labial mucosa, floor of the mouth, etc. How do these oral mucosas differ from each other? The masticatory mucosa is keratinized in nature, whether it is para or ortho, and it is having a dense connective tissue and has abundant of collagen fibers. These features will enable the masticatory mucosa to withstand the forces that are going to act on it. Whereas the lining mucosa is non-keratinized with loose connective tissue and has high amount of elastic fibers. This will allow the lining mucosa to move freely. And the specialized mucosa is a bit similar to that of lining and masticatory, but it has the taste buds which will help in the perception of taste. Now, let's see about the periodontium. Periodontium is derived from the Greek word peri, that means around, and odontos, meaning tooth. This is a dynamic structure which is composed of the tissues that are going to support and invest the teeth, and it is essential to maintain the teeth in function. It has four principal components. Now, when we look at the cross section of the tooth, the outermost soft tissue covering of the periodontium is gingiva, and the hard avascular mineralized tissue that is going to cover the anatomic root is cementum. And the soft tissue that is present between the cementum and the alveolar bone is periodontal ligament. The alveolar bone is nothing but the portion of the jaw that is going to hold the tooth and support it. Gingiva. Gingiva is defined as the part of the oral mucosa that covers the alveolar processes of the jaws and surrounds the neck of the teeth. This part of the oral mucosa is going to cover the alveolar process of the tooth, alveolar process of the jaws around the teeth, and it surrounds the teeth around its neck. And now different authors has proposed more or less of a similar definition, but has used a specific key terms to describe it. Linde has used masticatory mucosa, whereas Glossary of Periodontics have used the term fibrous investing tissue to define it. And they also gave a definition wherein they have explained gingiva to be covered by a keratinized epithelium and is contiguous with the periodontal ligament and the mucosal tissues of the mouth. Schroeder has defined it as a combination of epithelium and connective tissue seen in complete post-eruptive dentition of a healthy young individual surrounding and attaching to the teeth and the alveolar process. To just summarize these definitions, this gingiva is nothing but the part of the oral mucosa, especially the masticatory type, which is a fibrous investing tissue as it invests the tooth and the jaw and is covered by the keratinized epithelium, and it is also continuous with the periodontal ligament on the inner side and the mucosal tissues on the outer side, and it is not just going to surround the tooth and the jaws, but also is attached to these structures. Now Now let's see about the development. First, where does gingiva form from? Liz Garten and Mackenzie has proposed that gingiva is derived from the ectoderm and mesoderm. Ectoderm will give rise to the epithelial component, whereas mesoderm will give rise to the connective tissue components. Unlike this, gingiva, cementum, periodontal ligament, and alveolar bone are derivatives of the dental follicular proper, which is surrounding the enamel organ and the dental papilla. Now let's see when what will form. At the time of 15 weeks of intrauterine life, we can first see the epithelial differentiation to begin, and the first appearance of keratohyalin granules in superficial cell layers also can be seen. In a 3 to 4 month old fetus, there is high content of glycogen in gingival ridge. Stratum corneum production is limited to the crustal 3/4, that is the upper part, upper third of the ridge, alveolar ridge, which represents the future keratinized gingiva, and the bottom quarter is does not have a well-defined stratum corneum. Well-defined stratification won't be there, and it represents the future alveolar mucosa. And the junction between these two fetal epithelial types will represent the future mucogingival junction. At the 17 weeks of intrauterine life, the gingival ridge epithelium shows well-defined layers of keratohyalin granules, and epithelial stratification will also become evident. At 21 weeks of intrauterine life, there is distinct stratum spinosum and granulosum can be seen. After 19 or 20 weeks, the epithelial connective tissue interface will appear with the rete ridge formations being a first sign of development. Now let's see how these structures are formed. From the oral mucosal epithelium, the outer oral epithelium and the sulcular epithelium of the gingiva are formed, whereas the junctional epithelium is the derivative of reduced enamel epithelium. When the tooth is starting to erupt, the reduced enamel epithelial cells and the oral epithelial cells begin to show higher mitotic activity, and they proliferate towards each other, forming an epithelial mass. And while the tooth tries to enter into the oral cavity, this epithelial mass will begin slowly to degenerate, and this allows the tooth to enter the oral cavity without any bleeding. And once the tooth enters the oral cavity, the junctional epithelium is formed as reduced enamel epithelium is transformed to it. As the tooth continues to erupt, slowly the reduced enamel epithelium will also become shorter, and a shallow groove, that is the gingival sulcus, begins to develop between the tooth and the gingiva. As the tooth fully erupts, the junctional epithelium will attain its position at or above the CEJ. And the connective tissue is formed from the ectomesenchyme, which is nothing but the part of ectoderm which is influenced by the neural crest cells by means of reciprocal induction. This mesenchymal cells that are derived from the ectodental follicular and perifollicular region will eventually produce fibroblasts, transformed or differentiated into fibroblasts, which will in turn produce gingival fibers, non-collagenous proteins, and extracellular matrix. The neuroectoderm will give rise to the nerves, and the vasculature is derived from the mesoderm. And it is important to note that the epithelial mesenchymal interactions will enable the connective tissue to induce and postnatally maintain the prenatally established structural and functional specificity of the gingival epithelium. Now let's see the macroanatomy. Schluger et al. In 1990 has divided the gingiva anatomically into three parts. First is marginal gingiva, and then there is interdental gingiva, and then attached gingiva. These three structures show variations in differentiation, histology, and thickness based on their functional demand. Marginal gingiva. Ainamo et al. Has defined this as the terminal edge surrounding the tooth in a collar-like fashion. It is about 1 mm in width and its position is 1.5 to 2 mm from the CEJ, coronal to the CEJ. And Ainamo et al. Has also suggested that there is a gingival groove, like a depression kind of groove is present, demarcating the free gingiva from the adjacent attached gingiva, but this is only evident in about 50% of the cases. Gingival zenith or height of contour or zenith point. It's the most apical point of the marginal gingival scallop. If we take this gingiva is scalloped, that is contoured. If we see this contour, the most apical portion of this contour is gingival zenith, and it is about 0.06 mm in apico-coronal direction and 0.96 mm in the mesodistal direction. What is the clinical significance of this zenith? It is helpful in smile designing and as a reference for bonding braces and also for centering implants in the anterior region. Interdental gingiva. Cohen has first described it, and it is the part of the gingiva that occupies the gingival embrasure, and the lateral borders and the tip is formed by the marginal gingiva, whereas the central intervening portion of the interdental gingiva is formed by the attached gingiva. So, if stippling is seen involving interdental gingiva or not? Yes, stippling is seen, but only in the central part, which is formed by the attached gingiva. And the shape of the interdental gingiva will help in deflecting the foot from the embrasure. And this shape will depend on certain factors like presence or absence of a contact point and the distance between the crest of the alveolar ridge and the contact point, and presence or absence of a recession, as well as the adjacent teeth contour and root divergence, etc. If in case of a diastema, that means there is no contact point and space is present between the teeth, the gingiva is firmly bound over bone, forming a smooth rounded surface without interdental papilla. And this gingiva is found to be pyramidal in shape in anterior region, and it is caul shaped in posteriors. What is caul? Gingival caul is a valley-like depression connecting the facial and lingual papillas. Cohen has first identified that caul is concave shaped. McHugh has confirmed that interdental area is caul shaped through his study in rhesus monkeys. And Cohen also stated that this caul is vulnerable to disease and is an area of early periodontal involvement. The reasons for this could be this concave structure will allow for greater plaque accumulation in the interdental region, and it is also difficult to maintain, and this is found to be lined by a non-keratinized epithelium acting as a poor barrier for the microbes. And Takei in 1980 has found that the high incidence of caries and periodontal disease in the interproximal areas is partially the result of histologic and anatomic makeup of caul. Ross and Gargiulo in 1982 has suggested modification of this caul at the restorative and the alveolar interface by root contouring. This is kind of a pre-prosthetic surgery, and this modification of caul will achieve widening of the interproximal space, and also it allows the keratinization of the caul and also might help in making the caul convex or a bit less concave, and also leaves more interproximal space for the prosthesis. Applied aspects of interdental gingiva. In restorative point of view, it's important to recreate an interproximal area to minimize the food impaction and retention and allow for ease in plaque removal. And if in case there is an overhanging restoration or faulty marginal ridges then there is more chances of food impaction and there is more chances for the disease to start in this region. Interdental papillary house concept is proposed by Gonzalez et al. In 2011. This will allow diagnosis of cause of the papillary loss. Tarno's rule of 5 mm. It is the distance, if the distance between the crest and the contact point is less than or equal to 5 mm, then there is 100% of chance for the papilla to be present in that area. And it is about 56% if there is if the distance between the crest and the contact point is 6 mm. As the distance increases between the crest and the contact point, then the chances for the papilla to be there will also decrease. So there is only 27% of chance for the papilla to be present if the distance is 7 mm. What's the use of this Tarno's rule is, this will be helpful during papillary reconstruction. Coming to the attached gingiva, it is first described by Orban. This is a firm, resilient and tightly bound to the underlying periosteum of the alveolar bone by means of the connective tissue fibers. If we see this extent, the attached gingiva is continuous with the marginal gingiva but can be separated from it by a free gingival groove, which is evident in about 50% of the cases, and apically it extends to the relatively loose alveolar mucosa and is demarcated by mucogingival junction. This is only seen on the facial aspect, whereas on the palatal aspect it is going to blend with the equally firm palatal mucosa. So you don't find the mucogingival junction there. Lingually, it terminates at the junction of the lingual alveolar mucosa. Clinically, this attached gingiva will present a stippling, that is a series of rounded protuberances and depressions, giving a pure orange appearance, that is orange pure appearance. Functions of attached gingiva. This attached gingiva being firm and tightly adherent with a dense connective tissue, fibers and all, it spreads the apical spread of inflammation. It helps to withstand the stresses that are going to act on the gingiva. It braces the gingiva firmly against the tooth. It supports the marginal gingiva. It dissipates the pull of the marginal gingiva by means of muscle attachments that are present in the adjacent alveolar mucosa, and it also prevents the tissue recession and attachment loss. Width of attached gingiva. This width of attached gingiva is very important clinical parameter, and this is nothing but the distance between the mucogingival junction and the projection on the external surface of the bottom of the gingival sulcus or the periodontal pocket. What is this projection thing? This is nothing but when we measure the pocket, the base of the pocket projecting to the outer surface, on the outer surface of the gingiva is a projection on the external surface of the bottom of the sulcus or pocket. So from this point to the mucogingival junction is the width of attached gingiva. This width is varied from teeth to teeth and region to region. It is generally wider in the incisal region on the facial aspects, whereas wider in the molar region on the lingual aspect. It is about 3.5 to 4.5 mm and 3.3 to 3.9 mm for the mandible. And it is narrower adjacent to the premolars, about 1.9 mm in the maxilla and 1.8 mm in the mandible. And this width increases by the age of 4 years, and it is also increased with supraerupted tooth. The reason for this is, as the tooth erupts, the alveolar process height also increases, and simultaneously the attached gingiva covering it also increases. The width of the attached gingiva covering this also is going to increase. How do you measure the width of attached gingiva? Hall has proposed that the width of the attached gingiva can be determined by subtracting the sulcus or pocket depth from the total width of attached gingiva. So this total width of gingiva. This total width of gingiva is measured from the mucogingival junction to the crest of marginal gingiva. That is, to measure when we want to measure the width of attached gingiva, we have to first measure from the marginal gingiva, that is crest of gingiva, to the mucogingival junction, and then measure the depth of the pocket. Then subtract this sulcus depth or pocket depth from the total width of gingiva that we have already measured. So that will give the width of attached gingiva. How do you measure this determine the position of this mucogingival junction? First is visual. That is by this can be seen as a scallop line separating the reddish colored alveolar mucosa from the coral pink or pale pink attached gingiva present being adjacent to it. But in certain cases, we cannot clearly make out the mucogingival junction. So in such cases, we can go for the other methods. First is functional method. This is based on the difference in the tissue mobility between the firmly adhered attached gingiva and the freely movable alveolar mucosa. Can be done by tension test, that is lip pull or cheek pull, where we can see the movement of alveolar mucosa when we pull the lip and cheek. And the roll test is by rolling the side of probe from the alveolar mucosa towards the gingiva, and where the tissue stops moving, then that is the junction between the attached gingiva and the alveolar mucosa. Next is visual methods after histochemistry staining. This is done by using Schiller's or Luger's solution, that is iodine or potassium iodide, and this is based on the ability of iodine to react with the glycogen. Alveolar mucosa is found to have higher glycogen content, so it will react with this iodine and will stain brown. That is iodopositive reaction. By this, we can make out the alveolar mucosa and the gingiva. Now, this attached gingiva is found to be very important to maintain the health of periodontium, and there is a controversy on how much of this attached gingiva should be there to maintain the health of the periodontium. Lang and Low has suggested that 2 mm of keratinized gingiva, that is at least 1 mm of attached gingiva, is adequate to maintain the gingival health. Whereas Bowers has told that it is possible to maintain clinically healthy gingiva despite a very narrow zone, that is even there is less than 1 mm of attached gingiva. Wenstrom in 1987 has found that the lack of minimum amount of attached gingiva is not going to result in a soft tissue recession if there is proper plaque control. And Mehta et al. In 2010 has said that the width of attached gingiva is not significant to maintain periodontal health in presence of adequate oral hygiene. To summarize, if asked about the adequate width of attached gingiva, can say 1 mm according to Lang and Low, but it is always it should be remembered that if the patient maintains his oral hygiene well with the proper brushing techniques, then even though there is inadequate or width of attached gingiva, then it is possible to maintain the periodontal health with preventing any soft tissue recession. Coming to the gingival biotype, width is the distance between the mucogingival junction to the bottom of the pocket, but biotype is the thickness, the actual thickness of the attached gingiva. This gingival biotype is described as the thickness of the gingiva in the faciopalatal and facialingual dimensions. That is in this direction, horizontal, and faciopalatal or facialingual. When we measure the how thick is the gingiva, then that is gingival biotype. Siebert and Linde has categorized the gingiva into 2 types. That is, if it is about more than 2 mm, it is thick. It is less than 1.5 mm, it is thin scallop. What is the importance of this is going to impact on the outcome of restorative, regenerative and implant therapy, and there is found to be a direct correlation between the biotype and the susceptibility of the person to be prone for recession followed by any surgical procedure. And in recent 2017 World Workshop of Periodontology Classification, this biotype is renamed as, referred to as phenotype. Gingival sulcus. Orban and Mueller in 1929 has used the term gingival crevice. This is the shallow crevice or space that is going to surround the tooth, and it is bound by tooth on one side and the epithelium lining the marginal gingiva, that is sulcular epithelium, on the other side. This is V-shaped, and the measuring the depth of sulcus is an important clinical parameter, and the biologic depth is nothing but the depth of the sulcus as seen in histological sections. If we take a section of the gingiva, in those cross sections, how much is the distance between the crest of the gingiva to the junctional epithelium, that is biologic depth. It is about 1.8 mm, and the probing depth is the estimation of the distance penetrated by a probe, in how deep it is going to penetrate into the sulcus is probing depth, and it is generally 2 to 3 mm. In if it is 2 to 3 mm, it is clinically normal sulcus, and the biologic depth is never going to be, is generally not equal to probing depth, because the probing depth is dependent on various factors like probe angulation, amount of force used during probing, and the condition of the tissues, etc. And the ideal depth is 0 or close to 0 mm, but is not generally seen. Only may be seen in notobiotic animals or after intense and prolonged plaque control. These notobiotic animals are nothing but the germ-free lab animals, that is animals without any microbes. Gingival clavicular fluid. The gingival sulcus contains a fluid which is called as GCF. This is either a transudate or an exudate. This is very mostly used as a diagnostic or prognostic biomarker of the biologic state of periodontium in both health and disease. GCF flow is increased during inflammation and resembles to that of inflammatory exudate. This gingival fluid diffuses through the basement membrane in and out of the tissues, and that is into the sulcus, and from sulcus into the tissue. What are the functions of this GCF? This cleanses the material from the sulcus. It contains plasma proteins that may improve the addition of epithelium to the tooth, and also possess antimicrobial properties, and also has good antibody activity. That is, it has a very good role in defense mechanism of gingiva. Thank you for listening. If you have any queries, please drop them off in the comments box.